This is Tricia with Nex-Tech, and I want to welcome to the fastest 16 minutes in technology. We have Steve and Mark on the phone today, so I will quickly turn it over to them to get into our 16 minutes. Plus, wanted to remind everybody that if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the questions pane of your GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer everything at the end of the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Tricia, and of course, here with Mark, and we do have a special guest in the room today, Raymond. He is the one responsible for helping us put this presentation together. We wanted to welcome Raymond to the team here at Nex-Tech, and hopefully you'll be hearing from Raymond here in the coming months. With that, we're going to move forward to our talking about the desktop this year, and I'll be honest with you, Mark, if your desktop still looks like this PC, you probably have some serious needs. And if you're looking at one that still has a floppy disk installed on it, it's probably time for you to need a new PC. If you still have a CRT monitor, i.e. that big, thick monitor, it's probably time for a new PC. Quite frankly, if you're running Windows XP, it's time for a new PC too, isn't it?
Yep. Then Microsoft has announced end of life for XP, so definitely a good time to be looking at upgrades. I know I've seen a lot of reports, and I've heard a lot of people talking about codes and stuff that are already written for once XP is no longer supported that could gain people access to your computer and obviously valuable information. So it's not a situation that you want to put yourself in.
And we'll get a little bit deeper into that in the future. But let's start off a little bit with talking about some changes in the CPU. They've made some significant changes here recently. Mark, and why don't you tell us a little bit about the Tiny?
Yeah, so the Tiny is a Lenovo product that's come out. Size-wise, it's basically about 4 golf balls, long, length and width, about 4 golf balls, and it's only about a golf ball high. So very small unit. Some of the units come with a monitor-mounted bracket where, others you can order that separately. I think it's like $20 or $30, so not a whole lot of expense there, but it mounts right on the back of the monitor. The unit slides in there, so it makes it kind of an all-in-one, cleans up the desk. You don't have, a big tower on the floor, those types of things. And also just announced they're going to start shipping with wireless keyboard and mouse, so eliminate a lot of the wire that's laying on your desk. Another nice feature that this comes with is built-in it has built-in wireless. So it'll have an Ethernet port as well as a rubber duck antenna on the back, so you can have wireless access and really be able to use it almost anywhere.
And then the next form is more the standard, what we call the mid-form, or they call them small form factors, but the Tiny, I think, is an ultra-small form factor, or even smaller than that. But typically you see these sitting under a monitor, maybe 3 inches tall, a foot wide, those kind of things. Kind of what we're considering the standard. You can stand them up on edge like you see in our picture here, or you can lay them down depending on what fits your desk best. But one of the things that's nice about both of these form factors is we've seen a lot of units on the floor. You're kicking it, it's getting dusty, it's just collecting those dust bunnies all over. That's a real problem.
Yep, and next up, the all-in-one. We're actually, we'll get into the operating systems here in a little bit, but we're seeing a lot more of these units now with the Windows 8 application because of the touchscreen. Really nice setup for, if you want to mount it on a wall, those types of things, maybe in a lobby, waiting room, whatever. Wall mount, you can, place slides on it, pictures, whatever. Just kind of a really nice unit, all-in-one. Some of them do come with external keyboard and mouse. So if you're, wanting to utilize it, in your home or office where you need to type and those types of things, the keyboard will come in handy for that. But just, normal everyday use. Touchscreen works really well. Nice, big display. Very good product.
Excellent. And of course, we end with the standard tower. And I'll be honest with you, Mark, I can't remember the last time I sold one of these towers outside of somebody that needed vast storage inside of it for like CAD design, those kind of things. But most of the time, the power and performance can be found in any one of the previous models. Same thing with the processors. You don't need to go with this big a box, and then that just becomes a huge problem under your desk or on your desk or whatnot. And I would also add the plain fact that you notice a lot of these units, pictures here, don't actually have DVD or optical drives anymore. We're going away from that, and no real need to have optical drives anymore.
Right, and one thing I'd point out with the tower, all of the form factors across the board are very, very similar in price. So, it's not that if you buy, a tower, it may be $5 more or $5 less than a Tiny. They're all very close in price.
Absolutely. Which I guess, leads us into the processors. And Mark, there's kind of the three standard processors we're seeing now, the Core 3, the Core i3, the i5, and the i7. What's the difference?
Mainly what I see or notice, an i3 and i5 is going to be home, small business. i5, i7 is going to be, small to medium business or enterprise. I usually look at the i7 as more, graphic intensive. If you're running lots of different applications at the same time, you're going to need a lot more processing power. i5 is going to be your kind of middle of the road, your average or your standard. The i3 is going to be really good for home use, or if you're just doing internet, email, maybe a little bit of Microsoft Office. If you're not running heavy applications on it, you can really get by with an i3, and it's going to last and do you a lot of good.
And then, of course, moving to RAM, more is better, right? And the one thing I've seen recently is RAM is pretty low cost. So looking at when you're buying a new machine, see what just an additional doubling the RAM or additional 4 gig of RAM does, because it can definitely increase the long-term performance of your computer at a pretty low cost.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to do that on the front end than adding it later. Not that it's complicated or anything, but you may be looking at 20 or 30 bucks. Standard right now is typically 4 gig of RAM. There's some units you can get that still have 2, but I'd recommend looking at 4, if not 8, and just kind of see what the differences would be. So and then another thing to consider is the video card. Whether you're doing some Photoshop, photo editing, gaming, or high-end graphics use. Definitely something maybe to consider, as well as multiple monitors. Most of the standard video cards are still single monitor, but they do allow for some higher-end graphics and HD. But if you're wanting to do two screens or maybe even 4 screens, definitely look at that video card and make sure you're fitting your needs and getting what you want out of the PC.
And then, to end this conversation, the hard drive, we've had this conversation on our Fastest 16 Minutes before, but I can tell you that this is probably the single most impactful purchase that you can make inside of your device. They make the spindle drive, which are kind of standards, that spin at 5,400 is kind of the minimum. They go up to 7,200, 10,000 RPMs. They make hybrid drives that didn't have flash memory on them that increase their speed significantly, which is probably where I'd suggest going. And then you can go to strictly solid state. The limitations of solid state is the fact that you have a limited amount of storage, but if you don't need that total amount of storage, maybe you're using cloud or a server to put your information on, then that thing will be blazing fast. And adding that to any of the number of things that we listed prior to this is probably going to double, triple your speed of the machine. Is that what you're seeing, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking less than 30-second boot times, on 3-year-old equipment. So you're really going to drastically see a lot of performance enhancements by going with that solid-state drive.
At a low cost.
At a low cost.
All right, so Mark, monitors have become a bigger deal recently. They kind of stagnated for a while. Tell us a little bit about the monitor situation.
Yeah, so lots of different options there. We're kind of seeing the standard anywhere from 20 to 22 inch. I think the 19 inch is still pretty good option. It's getting harder to find, 14, 15, 17 inch monitors. Typically those are going to be even a little bit higher priced than the 19 to 22. So that's kind of the sweet spot. It's that 19 to 22 inch. One thing, we kind of showed on that first slide with that older computer, the big speakers sitting on your desk. For about the same price or maybe not much more, you can get, monitors with built-in speakers. You're just running the audio cord directly to your computer, so you don't have extra items sitting on your desk. It's all built in. Sound quality is still pretty decent, so you get a little bit of functionality out of it as well. Maybe another thing to consider is, if you're running a desktop, is a webcam in the monitor. Laptops and tablets come with webcams, so that's not as much of an issue, but they do have monitors with built-in webcams, so that may be something to consider if you're looking at video conferencing. And then, mounts is obvious depending on, if you've got a desk that you sit down at. I know here at Nex-Tech we've got several people that have migrated from the sit-down desk to the stand-up desk. So they've got a wall mount monitor with with a desk and no chair. So they're standing and working all day, a little bit more ergonomically correct and helps their back out and those types of things. And then just some, from the mounts, going to different monitors or multiple monitors so you can set up, 2, 3, 4, however many you need.
And of course, we put USB on here. If you get a Tiny or you're mounting the computer to the back of the monitor, it's nice to have USB access for the flash drives, for different accessories right on the side of the monitor. Most monitors now have that built in, so I'd definitely look at that. And then, of course, the touchscreen piece of this. We're not seeing a lot of touchscreen. They're quite a bit pricier on the base units, and unless you're really having maybe a customer experience that they're touching the monitor, we're not seeing it go quite that big on the desktop side.
Yeah, usually if somebody needs touchscreen for a desktop application, they're going with the all-in-one.
That's kind of what I'm seeing for
Yep.
sure. And of course, accessories. The keyboards, wireless keyboard, something we talked about earlier. This one that we have pictured here happens to be available in a backlit type keyboard. They have the shortcuts for the volume up and down. They have the shortcuts for different things like that. And especially if you don't have access to touching the desktop itself, that makes for a valuable piece. But the mouse, it's changed a little bit.
Yeah, definitely there's the standard wired mouse that comes with all the PCs. Wireless is an option. I made the comment yesterday, why don't PCs come with wireless keyboard and mouse now? I mean, it seems like the new technology, everybody's buying them. I think maybe as early as Q4 into next year, you'll probably see that shift where, if you buy a desktop, it comes with wireless keyboard and mouse. So that's something that I think is going to start coming here in the future. Obviously, the touch mouse works really well with Windows 8. It's got kind of a touch pad built into the top of the mouse so you can get more functionality out of Windows 8. And then the ergonomic, there's the joystick, Penguin, all sorts of different style. They've got the rolling ball, you roll it with your thumb. So just tons of different options. Get what fits and get what you like.
And pretty low cost. I mean, some of these start as low as $10, $15, and then they go up for sure. You can pay as much as you did for the computer almost, it seems like, but definitely in that realm. So what would you select? We already talked about Microsoft or Windows XP is going into life next year. So I would not buy a new PC or install Windows XP on it. Most things aren't even designed for a new computer to run on XP. But I think the same would be said for Vista. It's not coming into life, but why would you be looking to put that on a computer? I think that was a kind of a gap operating system. So, Mark, I think what you're seeing is most computers are coming with Windows 7, and then you can put Windows 8. What's that look like?
So typically the manufacturers are, everything that you purchase is going to come licensed for Windows 8, but a lot of times what they'll do is they'll pre-install Windows 7 on top of 8. So when you turn your computer on, it's running Windows 7. If you want to leave it like that, you leave it and use it as is, but the recovery disks and the licensing keys that they send you with the computer is Windows 8. So if you get a new machine, turn it on, and it's got 7, you can run those recovery disks, get it up to 8, and you're back up and going. One thing to keep in mind, though, is if you don't create recovery disks while it's Windows 7, you can't go backwards. So if you don't have that disk or create one, and you go to Windows 8, you can't go back. There may be a way to do it, but you kind of got to know what you're doing, and it takes quite a while. So I would recommend if you want to go to 8, think you might go back, make sure you make that disk.
And typically on a lot of the units we have, there's a button to do that where you just put in some media and it burns the DVDs for you. So it's not too painful unless you don't do it, right?
Yeah, and Lenovo's got a built-in application for that. So you just go into that application, tell it you want to create a recovery disk, put a burnable disk in, and click the button, and it'll create it for you. And so kind of what we're seeing from that approach is, if you're running Windows 7 or if you're buying a new computer, if you're running Windows 7, it's not necessarily a necessity to buy Windows 8 and upgrade it. What we recommend is when you get to the point where you need a new computer, then that's the time to make that change.
I would agree with that for sure. Software that you're looking to purchase a new computer, definitely Office 2013. If you're familiar with a lot of the previous versions, it's very similar. There are some advanced features that they've made small changes with. Running multiple monitors, it works better. But really, Office 2013 is just the core of Office production that we see, and there's a couple different versions of that. Installing Chrome, I don't know, I hate to say it, but I've seen some real problems with Explorer sometimes when certain web pages just won't work with Explorer. So you go ahead and click over to Chrome, and it seems to work fine. Adobe Reader, you got to have Adobe Reader to open a lot of those PDFs and things. And of course, Office will still open them now. That's kind of a new feature of them, but it's a free download. A photo editor from Adobe might be, if you edit any kind of photos, they have a low entry cost for kind of not that full-blown Photoshop, but something in the middle. Mark, tell us a little bit about those cloud solutions.
So then, SkyDrive or Dropbox is definitely a nice one to download. Basically, when we talk about those solid-state drives, if you need to dump some storage, back it up, those types of things, the cloud and SkyDrive and Dropbox are really good locations for that. And then it also gives you that functionality that you can access those files from a tablet, from a phone, and be able to work and get your data on the fly.
Of course, you got to have antivirus, you got to have patching, you got to have spyware protection and malware. I think that's a given, and if you're not familiar with those, give us a call to talk about those. And then finally, we kind of talk about a little bit about the printers. A big change in printers is laser printers have come down quite a bit.
Yep, we're seeing more, laser printers, especially, even for the home users of the small office. I think the inkjets are kind of run its course. The toner seems to dry out if you don't use it frequently. The toner on the laser, it's going to last longer. From a price standpoint, it's not a whole lot more, maybe 10, 15 bucks more, but you're going to get a lot more out of it. And then, also, definitely consider an all-in-one if you need to print, copy, fax, scan. A lot of these are coming in laser now, so you get a little bit, of enhancement with that.
And finally, we always suggest a small battery backup. That way, if the power flashes on and off, you don't lose what you're working on. We'll shut your computer down automatically if the power goes off. Great value to add. With that, we're going to turn it back over to Tricia and see if she has any questions for us.
I do have a few questions submitted, so I'll read those momentarily. If you have questions to submit, please go ahead and do that. In the meantime, I wanted to remind everybody that our next Tech Talk will be in October, and that is our deep dive about bandwidth shaping and control. And on that specific Tech Talk, we will have our vendor Symphonics joining us with that. You can find that event, that webinar, on our nextech.com/free webinar website, as well as a couple of live events that we're going to have going on the end of October. One in Hayes, one in Russell. We're going to be taking the tablets out on display, and Mark's going to be doing a great job explaining and letting everybody demo them as well if they would like, explaining the future office technology for everybody's office, be it tablets, desktops, whichever would fit best for you. And that also is on our nextech.com/free webinar page. Let me go to the questions now. Do the smaller form factors allow for the addition of video cards?
So they have, I don't believe they have an empty slot on the back. What we have been doing with the video cards is the USB 3 to video outlet, which still lets us do complete high-definition video output, so it's high resolution as what the built-in video cards will do, but it's done via USB 3. Some of the reasons that I happen to like that, and we've demoed them here and used them, is first of all, it's a very small adapter. It's not massive to hang off of it. Secondly, it allows that, if you want to take that off and use it on a different device, you can just take it with you. They're not very expensive. So that's what we've been doing, is running everything USB 3 on those, and I believe they have like 8 USB 3 ports on them. I mean, they're just loaded with ports.
Okay, very well. Next question, is there any truth to Internet Explorer not being as secure as using Chrome or any other browser?
So, I think it depends on which pieces. Definitely, we're hearing the same thing. I don't think that I'm going to say that one browser is more secure than any other browser. I think that they all have their inherent problems, and I would always recommend having a good protection software to protect you from those things. Also, something that Mark and I were talking about, specifically like Adobe Reader is a great example. When you go out to install Adobe Reader, if you just hit click next a couple times, it's going to automatically install different programs, different toolbars, and you gave it permission to do that no matter what browser you were in. And so it comes down to the user paying attention to what you're agreeing to and what you're not. One feature that I would say that I do like about Chrome that I'm not familiar with it having in Internet Explorer is you can have an incognito browser tab in Chrome. So it does not track your browsing history, does not collect any cookies, and everything is completely separate viewing. And so that can be a big value to a customer that just wants to make sure that if they're going to a site they're worried about something coming in on, you can use that separate browsing tab.
Okay, so that's kind of a follow-up question. Would Chrome be your preferred browser?
I run them both equally. I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, we've got a few, I know I've got a few websites that it seems like when I launch them in Chrome, they just don't quite run as clean. They're a little glitchy, but when I run them in Explorer, they run perfect. One of the examples I'll use is the Outlook web client. So when I use it in Chrome, some of the functionality just isn't there, probably because it's not a Microsoft browser. But when I run it in Explorer, it runs great. All the functionality's there. So some of that just depends, and that just comes over time. I use Chrome the majority of the time, but then I do know I have maybe 4 or 5 websites that run better in Explorer, so I'll just run them in that browser.
Okay, next question. Excuse me. They've seen that the USB 3.0 radio frequency, they've seen some interference on the 2.4 gigahertz devices, like wireless keyboards and mice. Is this a common problem?
Yes, it's a common problem. Most of what we're seeing now is going Bluetooth, and we're seeing they're coming with their own proprietary dongle. And when I say dongle, I mean this thing just hangs out of the USB port by maybe 1/4 of an inch. Is that about right, Mark? Yep. And so they're going wireless, but it's still a Bluetooth technology on that. We're seeing that 2.4 and some of these other, what used to be kind of the standard on some of these wireless keyboard and mouse go away, because we used to have the same issue. I know that I had a set of wireless keyboard and mouse at my desk, and the gal had an office right next to me. Every once in a while, both of ours would freak out. It looked like they were the same brand, and everything would interfere. However, Mark, I think we're all running right now, most of us are running Logitechs or Microsofts. In here in the office, I have not had that problem lately. I can't even tell you the last time I had a problem with my wireless, but I was very gun shy here a while back. So I think there's been some significant improvements in that wireless piece of the keyboards and mice, but they've definitely gone to more proprietary to each device, where it's not quite as, you could just buy like one hub and then you could buy all the keyboards and mice that you wanted and it all worked on that. They don't really have that anymore.
Okay, the next question I have is what spyware or malware removal utility would you suggest?
Well, I mean, definitely using Malwarebytes is probably, I think that's the one our technicians are using the most often. I also make sure that you have Windows Defender up to date. Depending on what version of Windows, you may have to install Windows Defender. It is part of the Microsoft patching, and that's going to give you kind of that first layer of protection. I wish I could tell you that there was some tool out there that just stopped all this. There isn't. I hate to say it, that my wife is constantly, every once in a while, having some of this stuff pop up, toolbars showing up, and some of them are legit, meaning you've agreed to it and you may not have read the fine details. Some of it's just complete, quite frankly, just horrible marketing on other people's part, where they're just forcing you to install that. And a lot of it has to do with, if you're downloading something that's free, a lot of times they're requiring you to install their toolbar, and then that's why you're getting this other application for free. So be really careful when something looks a little too good to be true, because a lot of times there's some hidden stuff in there that happens. Couple quick hints on that too. If you go to a run command within Windows, any version that's Windows 8 all the way down to XP, and just type in msconfig, is one word, no spaces, it'll bring up a start menu of what's running in the background when your computer starts. You can kill a lot of those applications so that they don't just auto-run in the background. The second hint is, of course, go to the control panel, to the software programs, and remove this software. You have to, click on the application, hit remove, and it'll remove it. Those have been pretty successful. However, sometimes there's some stuff that's really super sticky, and our technicians will sometimes have to get involved because it's just really bad. Kind of an almost borderline on virus, but we still call it malware.
Okay, kind of a question B follow-up to that. Does Microsoft Security Essentials provide adequate protection?
I would say for a home user it absolutely does provide great protection for a home user. I think from a network level, specifically if you're needing to protect, have kind of a layered protection support. So I think from a business standpoint, we always recommend a firewall. That gateways your business from the outside world, and it'll also help protect the PCs. You need to have the software and advanced software on the PC that then helps a secondary level, because at home, if your computer gets infected, you may infect one or two machines. In the office, you can infect all your machines, servers. It could get into printers. It could get into all kinds of funny things. So we always recommend an additional layer than Microsoft Security Essentials, which does come basic on Windows 8 now. It's just built in. But we still recommend, and we're still seeing from our technical team that these advanced virus programs are catching more than what the standard Security Essentials are. Beyond that, I'm running just Security Essentials at home. Mark, is that what you're doing?
That's what I run at home, yes.
But I don't think I'd do that on my work computer.
Right.
Okay, one last question. Can you address the processor speed and processor cores, like the dual versus the quad, and how these impact a purchase?
Yeah. So the first thing that you might be familiar with is a lot of the software that's coming out, like Windows, is now 64-bit versus 32-bit. And this is where these additional cores come into play a lot better when you're at 64-bit, is that a multi-core processor can be doing different tasks at the same time, and the operating system can, say, send video to one core processing and maybe the mathematical processing to another core, and then increasing the amount of speed that you as an end user sees happening at once. I think all of the most current processors are usually quad-core currently. We're seeing exponential growth in that, and it gives that computer basically, even though it's running at a certain gigahertz, that you can then run multiple processors all at the same time and get more tasks done in the same period of time. I'm not sure that I answered that question very well, because the other part that comes into this is built into the architecture of the processor is also the fact that there's some cache that sits in front of this, so that the hard drive and the other parts of the computer can then send the information into the processors faster than some of the older processors that were out there. There's some better code in there to handle video processing skills on these new current processors. And it really comes down to a complete organizational health in that computer. So making sure that you have a good solid hard drive that then has a good bus into this processor that then has good video processing to then get it out to your multiple monitors. You can't just make sure that you focus on, say, processing speed. It becomes as a whole, the whole thing works together, and making sure that you have a good balance of all solid parts working together, I think, is most important. Is that what you're seeing, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. And like Steve said, I think kind of the standard anymore, on a computer's anywhere from 2 to 4 cores on the processor, whereas the servers are, 4 to 6. But definitely, you can get 8-core processors and those types of things if you ask for it. But from a standard, if you're just purchasing something, that's about where things are at, and it just kind of depends on how many applications you're running and how heavily you're using it.
And something that I would add, too, is the fact that most of the processors are faster than the rest of the piece of that computer. Adding the solid-state drives on the hard drive piece, you would notice a more significant jump in speed on doing that than you would increasing the processor by a few hundred megahertz. You probably wouldn't even notice that, but the hard drive, I promise you, we have people that are getting these solid-state drives that are just wowed by the performance. I mean, it's so instantaneous. So make sure that you get all quality components. And if I was going to make one recommendation to make sure that you get, I would look at that hard drive component of it for speed.
Okay, I think you just answered it. We did have one more or a couple more questions based on what you were talking about. But the question came in, are hard drive speeds fast enough to get maximum performance from new processors?
And not the spindle drives for sure.
Okay. And then the next question is, does the gigahertz matter? I see new computers at 1.9 gigahertz and others at 3.2 with a 4-quad processor.
It comes down to price on this, I'll be completely honest. If I can go from the bottom range that you listed there to the top of that range for, $50, I'd do that in a heartbeat. But, the problem that we're seeing in our industry is, that difference in price is many hundreds of dollars, potentially thousands of dollars, depending on the unit. So I personally want to find a balance between price and performance there. And what I would suggest right now is going with a mid to low range processor, but look at those solid state or hybrid drives, and that's where you're going to see the value. I also suggest, a couple things that Mark and I talked about. Look at keeping a computer 3 years, absolute maximum 5 years. That's just the life of a computer today. And then the next piece of it is maybe you buy a computer in that $500 to $750 price range, knowing that you can replace it in 3 years versus buying a $1,500 computer that you have to replace in 5 years. You would be much happier buying 2 computers than just 1 computer at double the price. I guarantee it.
All right, that's everything for today's Fastest 16 Minutes in Technology. Hope to see you next time. Thanks. Bye.